welcome to episode 266 of Cinematary. I'm your host, Zach Dennis, and I'm here with
Lydia Creech,
Nathan Smith,
and today we are joined by, I'm going to call you our intern. We have Gabbi Lewis here. She's a student at the Savannah College of Art and Design, and she's going to be watching what I'm doing on our side, which is me sitting in my room with my cat and a lot of equipment. But Gabbi, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, no problem. Glad to be here.
We're probably going to make you talk a little bit.
That's cool.
All right, well, we have a host of stuff right now on the website. Real quickly before we jump in, we're going to talk about Ad Astra in a second, but we have a review by Logan Kinney on that. If you would like to check it out. We also have a review by Courtney Anderson of It Chapter 2. So 2 of the bigger movies that have come out the last few weeks. Check those out. We also have the full schedule for our found footage horror series. So if you are curious about what's coming up next, please head over there and check it out. And of course, we're going to be recording our latest Film Theory and Chill episode for the Patreon page. And so if you have not joined on the Patreon page, please do, because it's going to be fun. But let's go ahead and talk about movies that we saw this week. Nathan, I'm going to kick it off with you.
Yeah, so I will start with the new release of the 2 movies I wanted to talk about this week. I had the opportunity to see the latest and presumably last entry in the long-running Rambo film series, which is fittingly called Last Blood, which came out last weekend, and it is, unlike the last Rambo movie, which came out about a decade ago, it's not directed by Sylvester Stallone. It is directed instead by Adrian Grunberg, whose only directing credit thus far, solo directing credit thus far, is the this like shitty-looking Mel Gibson movie called Get the Gringo. So you kind of already know, I think, like what you're in for with this movie. It is, if you are familiar at all with the films of Millennium Entertainment, the company behind such franchises as the Expendables series, the Olympus, London, and Angel Has Fallen films, the Mechanic movies with Jason Statham, the Ninja movies with Scott Adkins. This is like barely above direct-to-video grade action filmmaking, like all of those movies I just listed. It is basically a Taken movie in Rambo's clothing. Stallone's character has retired to a ranch where he rides horses and hangs out with a family that he's, like, I guess, sort of adopted, or they've adopted him. This old woman and her young granddaughter. And it seems like Rambo has been involved in their lives for a while, but it's like I felt like there was some context missing, and it just seems like he's just sort of shows up there and like decides to take care of these people and make decisions about their lives. So basically, he lives in Arizona, and the woman and the girl that he lives with are Latino, and the young girl, whose name is Gabrielle, wants to track down her father in Mexico. Rambo says, no, you can't do that. You know, you're just a teen. Bad stuff's gonna happen to you, because that's what happens down there, I guess, according to Rambo and the worldview of this movie. And of course, she disobeys Rambo's advice and decides to go to Mexico anyways, and gets sold immediately into sex slavery, and which gives which then of course gives Rambo occasion to hop down in his truck and go across the border and unleash complete mayhem on a bunch of people that he has never met before. It's like very mediocre, very bland. There's like no reason really for this to honestly be a Rambo movie. It has such little connection to like the character or the other films. beyond some really clunky sort of PTSD flashbacks and some voiceover narration, there's just like not really a lot to tie this to the other films. And really the only thing that distinguishes it from just basically like any kind of shitty contemporary action movie that is made without a lot of thought or care. Really, like the only thing to distinguish it from any kind of other movie of that type is the violence itself, which there is not a lot of, but what there is particularly intense to basically like the point of this kind of being a slasher movie, with Rambo just like walking around in the shadows of Mexico in a trench coat with a lot of scars on his face, like shoving his knives into people's flesh, and like a lot of decapitation in this movie, a lot of bones crunching, a lot of bodies exploding. That's really only like 10 to 15% of the movie, which is like a little disappointing just because it's like the rest of the movie is so insipid and useless, that's the only interesting thing about it, is how shocking the violence is. And the like final action set piece of the movie is kind of nuts, but it really just feels like the previous 90 minutes, were kind of written purely to execute this like Rube Goldberg-esque complicated gag action set piece at the end of the movie. Yeah, it's just like, I don't know. It's like, it's just basically exactly, I think, what anyone expects from a movie where Sylvester Stallone is like saving the victims of sex trafficking. Like, I don't know. It's like, it's hard for me to necessarily like, it's a reactionary movie, but like all of the Rambo movies, I think it's more like ideologically confused than anything else. Like, it is pretty xenophobic and like pretty racist in just a sort of like very generic way. Like, that is just like the kind of assumed worldview of the movie, that just like everybody in Mexico is evil. But there's also like a lot of weird moments where like at one point Rambo is driving back into the United States from Mexico, and he stops at the border, and there's like this sign that says like, "This is the US. Do not cross the border." And he looks at the sign for a minute and then just like drives right through the border fence, which sort of feels like a weird, like, fuck you, Donald Trump kind of statement, but also like the rest of the movie feels like total, like a total dog whistle to, your grandpa, who has had his brain zapped out to death by Fox News.
So
like,
who is this movie
I mean,
for?
exactly that. Just like people who have had their brains microwaved by Fox News. Like, it's just, I guess, for whoever was waiting for Rambo to come back and dispense justice and fix things. That's who this movie is for. If you think that a man with a knife walking around stabbing people can solve the great social problems of our day, then this movie is for you. Otherwise, I think that this should mostly be left to probably just the Stallone completists like myself. It lacks the kind of insane passion and homoeroticism of Rambo First Blood Part 2, or and it lacks the like pure tragedy and melodrama of First Blood. It's just not very interesting, unfortunately. But if for some reason you do feel drawn to Last Blood, it's in theaters now. So,
well, on higher, more fulfilling notes, I feel like you saw another movie that I think was a lot better than Sylvester Stallone fighting sex crimes.
Yeah, I did. In preparation for a movie that you will be talking about in a little bit, I have been going through the catalog of one James Gray, the American filmmaker behind movies like The Immigrant and The Lost City of Z. I feel like there are 4 or 5 movies of his most of his movies that I have not seen. So I've been kind of catching up with those over the past few weeks. And I just watched a few days ago his movie Two Lovers with Joaquin Phoenix and Gwyneth Paltrow. And I need to pull up who else is in this movie because there are other. Oh, Vanessa Shaw from such films as Eyes Wide Shut and Corky Romano. You may recognize her from those movies. It also has Isabella Rossellini in it as well. So really like stellar cast. Like a lot of James Gray's movies, this is a very New York story. It follows this guy named Leonard, played by Joaquin Phoenix, who lives with his parents in Brooklyn. His parents own a dry cleaning business and he works for them. He has bipolar, he's depressed, and the movie opens with him trying and failing to commit suicide. And so it's a movie that is really focused on mental illness and sort of follows Leonard's relationships with two women who become the titular Two Lovers. One is the daughter of this other dry cleaning company that wants to buy out his parents. That's the woman played by Vanessa Shaw. And then there is another a neighbor that Leonard falls for, who's played by Gwyneth Paltrow, who, like him, has had a lot of problems with mental illness and has been institutionalized. And so he's sort of drawn to her just because of their kind of like shared history of instability. And he feels like, you know, Sandra is the person who is more upfront with her love for him, but he's becomes more drawn to Michelle, the Gwyneth Paltrow character, because of this like connection he feels they have because of their mental health. And this movie, it like really blew me away. James Gray's movies that he made before this were like very kind of in the Scorsese sort of inspired crime drama mold, you know, just focusing on men and their families. But this is different. It's actually like inspired by a Dostoevsky story, and it's still sort of in this, you know, like kind of gritty, very Jewish, very Eastern European part of Brooklyn that James Gray grew up in and sets a lot of his movies in. It's still in that same area, but it's just like a totally different story. It's very romantic and very emotional and very melodramatic. You know, it's a contemporary story, but it feels so classical, like in the structure, you know. I mean, it is kind of a movie, you sort of know where the relationship beats are going and like what's going to happen at the end of the day. And, you know, it's sort of maybe clear at a certain point who's going to end up with who. So like on a kind of structural storytelling level, you know, it's working, I think, maybe in a sort of like generic mold. You know, it's not like an original story. That's not really the draw. It's more just like James Gray kind of lets the framework of this very classic romantic story do the work. So the kind of characters' emotions can have a sort of unpredictability. You know, there's like a really sort of lived in quality where like, even though you do sort of know how the story will end, you don't exactly know how these feelings and emotions are going to arise and manifest. And the character relationships are still sort of undefined and ever changing and really interesting to me. It's like, I think one of Joaquin Phoenix's best performance, because you know, lately in his past few movies, you know, he's gotten really kind of extreme with his acting style. And I've always just kind of preferred the like funny, adorable Joaquin Phoenix, you know, like in Inherent Vice and you know, more, you know, like his more comic performances. And this is a really amazing synthesis of his kind of sheepish, awkward, adorable comic sensibility and the kind of like darker side, you know, the side of him that is really good at evoking physically, like, you know, the mental state of a character. This gets
So not like Joker.
no, it's like no, not at all, but it does sort of show, like, I think why, Todd Phillips probably wanted him for a movie like The Joker, just because he is somebody who I think really considers like the mental health of a character in his performance. So, I think this is like the best of Joaquin. I think it's like some amazing cinematography and camera work, the best of James Gray's directing, also really, really great performances from Gwyneth Paltrow and Vanessa Shaw. And Isabella Rossellini is just like a supporting character sort of in this movie, and she doesn't have the biggest part, but her relationship with Joaquin Phoenix, she plays his mom, is just like really touching and kind of sneaks up on you, and you don't realize how important she is in to the movie and to him until sort of the end. But like, I don't know, it had me weeping a little bit. And I think I needed that. And it was a very, I don't know, it's just like a very emotionally fulfilling movie for me. Like, so I definitely, whether or not you've seen Ad Astra or other James Gray movies, I definitely encourage you to seek this one out. And especially on Blu-ray if you can, because I got that Netflix in the mail still, and I copped that Blu-ray, and it was worth it, my friends. It's a pristine chef's kiss of a movie. So
I think it's on Tubi, Tubi, if you would like to watch it there.
Sure, yeah, Tubi. Tubi or not Tubi.
Oh my god.
Tubi or to watch it on Blu-ray.
Chef's kiss movie.
He likes to have chef's kiss.
I like that a lot.
Yeah, I think a little known fact about me is that I invented the chef's kiss meme, not the actual kissing of the fingers, but as a meme, I really feel like I brought that into existence a few years ago. So exactly, yes. You heard it here.
It's like we're meeting heroes over here.
Mm-hmm.
Well, on the James Gray, I guess, train to an extent, his new movie is Ad Astra. It's in theaters now. It stars Brad Pitt, and it seems like most of the cast of the Ocean's trilogy wanted to like make space movies. So George Clooney had Gravity, Matt Damon had The Martian, Brad Pitt has Ad Astra. And honestly, Brad Pitt's version is probably the best out of the three of those. So I'll just say that. So Ad Astra is about Brad Pitt plays this astronaut who initially is in this not really a crash, but they have there's a power meltdown where a power surge comes through and knocks him off of this giant structure. They've created this giant antenna that runs from the Earth into the solar system that they are working on. This is in as they describe, the near future, as humans have kind of developed the almost space travel to almost a pedestrian kind of level. People are kind of flying back and forth between the moon and Earth. And at one point he is flying from the moon to Mars. And so it's this kind of near future where space travel and space exploration has become a little bit more common rather than this giant leap of man. And so after this surge that kind of causes him to have to kind of not reconsider, but I guess kind of figure out what he wants to do next in terms of his job. The military calls him and reveals that his father, who's played by Tommy Lee Jones, who initially went on a mission probably, I guess, in this time frame, like 30 or 40 years prior, on a mission to Neptune in order to find more life outside of our solar system. Many thought he was dead because they lost communication with him, but as the military tells Brad Pitt's character, his father is still alive, and they want him to travel to Mars where they can send a message from pretty much like a fancy Mars podcast studio to into Neptune. That's what it kind of looks like. It's like he goes into this NPR studio and is talking to his dad. But he's supposed to go to this place and try to send messages to Tommy Lee Jones in order to see what's happening, whether he is alive, and figure out what's going on. Along the way, though, he begins to kind of uncover more and more about about what's going on in terms of the plans that the military has in order to deal with Tommy Lee Jones's character. It seems like this movie's kind of been billed as like this Brad Pitt has daddy issues and is trying to find his dad. It's a little more nuanced than just that. I think that kind of comparing it to other space exploration movies, you have something like 2001, which has this very hyper futuristic, almost clean, pro technology view. I'm thinking mainly of like the scene when he's going to the moon and finds the second whatever, the obelisk or whatever, and it's kind of like this neat futuristic. You have all of these gadgets. It's space is kind of this incredible cool frontier that you can enter to, but it also has like, it's half of that and half of kind of the postmodernism that Blade Runner kind of instills, where you have like this sense of you have this outer sense of you can travel around space, but you also have this kind of consumerism where it's much more commercialized. There's a scene very early on in Ad Astra where Brad Pitt is traveling, like I mentioned before, from Earth to the moon in order to travel then from there to Mars. And he arrives on the moon, and then the moon is pretty much like any other. Like if you were going to like JFK Airport or Hartfield Jackson in Atlanta, like he literally flies in and you can see the logo for an Applebee's. And so it's kind of interesting where you have like this meshing of this kind of neat hope of like this futuristic technology in the future in space, but then, and he makes a point of it through the voiceover, that whenever we reach this point of space exploration and kind of this new level of seeking, beyond ourselves as humans, once we get to this point here on the moon where we're able to kind of colonize it to an extent, we immediately commercialize it and make it this commodity once again, which I found to be a really interesting angle. Brad Pitt's character kind of makes comment about this because the organization that he's working for is called Spacecom, and it's similar to what you see in something like in 2001, where it's just this organization that seems kind of outside of the realm of the government, but also it's more in the private realm, and it's this organization that is kind of shepherding the space exploration, and they naturally have this ulterior motive. And so it's interesting to see him kind of coming to grips, one, with his kind of militaristic duty. A lot of this movie is about the internalized the inability that he has to kind of express what he is thinking or feeling at any point. It's a movie about repressed emotions. I know that Logan wrote about this kind of extensively in his review of the film, but it's this Pitt's character is really kind of sad to behold for most of it, just because he has this way of portraying, similar, Nathan, to what you were talking about with Joaquin Phoenix's character in Two Lovers, where you can sense the kind of repression that he has built up through his relationship with his father, who very much seems beholden to his duty and is not in any way clued into his emotional side in any sense of the word. And it's very much exploring this idea of what we as men view as needed or valuable emotions. As the movie moves along, it's exploring this kind of concept of which emotions are valuable as we continue to progress as for whatever that word means, progress as like a human species. At least in the context of this movie, it seems like emotion and having any sort of feeling or regret or doubt becomes much less useful in the context of the mission. There's a part about halfway through the movie where Brad Pitt's character is flying from the moon to Mars, and he has there's a small crew along the ship with him, and one of the members clearly is kind of not totally sure of the decisions that he's having to make along the way, seems a little reticent to take part in a couple of the hiccups that go along the way. And you can see how Brad Pitt's character, who recognizes that he needs to be completely locked in and unemotive to the mission, is reacting to this, and how he's reacting in the way that that they would like to see that, compared to this guy who is showing some, just a bit of reticent and a bit of just any sort of human emotion in any sense. And it's interesting that this future, at least in terms of this movie, compared to the futures of other sci-fi movies, whether it be like 2001 or the two that I mentioned before, like The Martian or Gravity, which are much more interested in kind of, it seems like much like base level human emotions. This one is kind of leaping past that and looking at what emotions mean in the future context of humans, and kind of how we are constantly seeking to uncover what it means to be human through how we view ourselves in the context of the greater scheme of things, that maybe what we think is right is not necessarily the right path. And so I really was kind of moved by this film. I was not a big fan of Lost City of Z, which is probably the only James Gray movie that I've seen outside of this, but yeah, I really dug Ad Astra, and so I'll be curious if you guys check it out to hear more about it, because I think Brad Pitt gives this truly incredible performance in it. If you want to get into like the darkest depths of depression, you just need to like be on a, how long was it, like 75-day mission or flight from Mars to Neptune. Just be there by yourself, feel your feelings. That's what Brad Pitt does. Speaking of the human race continuing to deteriorate and become not essential in the future of the world, I also watched a documentary called American Factory. So the crux of this is they are in Dayton, Ohio. There was a large was it General Motors? I think General Motors plant, and which offered a number of jobs to the people there, but it closed down a couple years back. And so this Chinese billionaire comes in. He opens up a factory for his company, which is Fuyao. I think it's Fuyao, which is it's developing glass. And so he opens up this factory, hires 2,000 American workers, and it's like this merging of the Chinese workforce and the American workforce. He has a number of Chinese workers who come over to kind of train up the Americans, teach them what has been working for the company over in China, as well as to kind of merge the two cultures. And so initially, you have this story of the attempted revitalization of the Rust Belt and the blue-collar working Americans in the middle part of the United States. And you also have this kind of culture clash, because you have the Chinese working culture compared to the American working culture. And there's a lot of scenes where you have the Chinese workers who are literally in this room. It's pretty comical. You have this scene where they're like describing what you're going to run into with the Americans. They're very free thinking. They like to just kind of be who they want to be. This offers you an opportunity to do that because you're here in America. We're very fat. We're very brash. We have a lot of tendencies that way. And then you have, when it comes to the Chinese workers, they're viewed as much more efficient. There's the efficiency rate at the Chinese factories compared to the first few months at the American factory. It's just literally night and day. And a lot of the Chinese executives are specifically the billionaire who like opened the factory is complaining about how the American workers are talking too much and kind of lazy and not getting nearly the amount of work done. And so as this clash continues to kind of set in, you also have just the this high tech world. At one point, the American executives who they've hired to run this factory in Ohio go to China to see a celebration for the company, and you're watching the high tech efficiency of these workers and of this factory in China compared to what's happening at this factory in Ohio. And as the movie moves along, you see these American executives try to implement this in America. There's this hilarious scene where it's not really hilarious. It's more funny in the context. The guy who is trying to implement it's kind of an asshole, but he watches this one sequence where the Chinese workers are working very effectively, and he's talking to one of the floor workers for the company in China, and he's saying that the Americans are lazy and they're constantly talking too much, and that they don't. If he could just like take duct tape and put it over their mouths, they would be much more efficient. And he sees the guy who he was talking to in China bring together his workers, and the workers like kind of line up almost in a militaristic style and sound off I think there's like 18 of them, and they each say like a number up to from 1 to 18, and it's just like this very military esque routine. And so the American tries to do it, and the American workers just look at him like, what the hell are you trying to get us to do? Like it's like 9, it's like 8 in the morning, they're just staring at him, and so you see just this kind of cultural clash. But then as the movie moves along, you also see how China, or at least this Chinese billionaire, finds that automation and more robotic workers seem to be much more effective. And that kind of tails in at the end of this documentary. It kind of is not something that you see the entire way through. But I watched this because the Next Picture Show paired this with Harlan County, USA, which we talked about a couple months ago for our series Truth and Fiction in the South. And so it was interesting to see the comparison between Harlan County and what we kind of talked about with that movie, and those workers trying to unionize. And then you have this kind of union plot within this one, and it definitely doesn't settle. And it was kind of interesting to think about it. Nathan, I'll be curious, because I know you watched this, to get your opinion as well about like the attempt to unionize in 2019 compared to when Harlan County came out, because it seems like, especially with the workers who were working in this factory in Ohio, in the kind of 2019 sphere, that there was a lot more to lose. And when they went up for the union vote, it failed, as people saw their because of the efficiency rate that these Chinese executives and these American executives here at this plant were kind of asking for. It was kind of a quick replacement rate. But yeah, Nathan, I know you watched this movie. I'm curious your thoughts on American Factory and how it kind of compared to Harlan County.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say that necessarily that in the American Factory, but that there is more to lose necessarily. I think what the real difference between the two movies is honestly, like, I mean, a kind of issue of setting, both in like terms of time and in place, that Harlan County, USA really is like in this kind of hotbed moment of organizing, and the history of union activism and of labor organizing in Appalachia is so rich and strong, and so deeply embedded in like the family life of the region, that you have people are just like, it's easier, I think, for some people to be more committed to the union line in the world of Harlan County, USA, because that's like tradition, that's like something that's been passed down, and something that there's a real emotional investment in. Whereas you see in American Factory that, like, in the decades since then, that the labor movement in America has been squashed in so many ways, that especially in the South, and also throughout the Rust Belt, unions have just been like stamped out, and people, this sort of, one really interesting thing I think about this movie is that you see this sort of almost the propaganda campaign that Fuyao carries out. They bring in these, these people from like, what is it called? Like, the consultancy
the
firms,
labor institute thing or whatever.
Yeah, these consultants who basically their entire job is to like, be the person who's brought in when a company is trying to bust a union effort, to like give a very scary presentation and make all of these kinds of threats and scare people away. And you see in this movie, you hear like a secret recording that somebody took of one. And it says, that they carried out like 3 or 4 or 5 or something of these different meetings with these consultants, where they had all the workers hear this terrifying lecture. And so I think that you just see the kind of the scales are different, where it's like you see how effective the anti-union effort in this country has been, and the effort to really destroy solidarity between workers. So I think that's kind of the difference between the sort of the settings of American Factory and of Harlan County, USA. It was a really interesting movie. It's almost like I feel like a little bit sort of like a peppier Frederick Wiseman movie, like kind of on fast forward or something, and with musical cues, because it's not like a super heavy kind of talking head movie. And these sort of characters just kind of emerge from the people, on screen. And they're not really like, there are, certain individuals who are emphasized, but there are also just like familiar faces that sort of show up, and you don't really know specifically who they are. You just know that they're like an executive or a laborer of some kind. And, there's a...
Well, I'd like to also add that initially this was supposed to be from like the Fuyao side. Like they hired the directors to make this documentary.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
Yeah, they were talking about it in the next Best Picture Show episode. And they initially hired them and were like, we want you to like document this, and we want you to kind of show this transition of us coming to America and establishing this plant. And the directors came back and were kind of like, okay, we'll do this, but we're not going to follow. We're going to make the movie we want to make. We're not going to make the movie you want to make. And to the credit of the Fuyao executives, they were like, okay. And so that's why they got so much access to a lot of those meetings and with the billionaire and everything.
I will say one thing about, though, that this does have in common with Harlan County, USA. And the way that they go about it is a little bit different. And I think in American Factory, it's maybe unintentional, but you do see, in Harlan County, USA, you see the real violence used against the labor movement, and how much, these union activists and union members put on the line in terms of a real physical cost. And in American Factory, it doesn't get to that level of heatedness, but you do see, like you mentioned, when they go to China and the American guy's making this joke, air quotes joke about wanting to tape his workers' mouths shut. And then there's another moment where like one of the American Fuyao executives hears I guess it's like their opening day, and the senator, I think Sherrod Brown from Ohio, comes and gives us a speech.
Yeah.
And he says, oh, I heard there's a union effort here. I just want to say, I stand with you guys, and I like back your vote and whatever. And the American executive is like, I just want to like take, a giant pair of scissors and just like chop his head off. And these are these things that are just said like in passing very casually, but you do see this kind of like these violent threats that like undergird the status, the labor hierarchy between boss and worker, where there's always at some point, even if these guys, even if these bosses may not get to that, like they do still have these violent impulses in them where they want to literally physically oppress their workers and physically intimidate them into doing what they want. So I was not expecting that. And there are some kind of shocking moments like that in this movie where it's like, oh shit, like this is very real. And so I appreciated that. I appreciate, Netflix puts out a lot of shit, but sometimes they put out a little gem, a little pro-union gem, pro-labor gem. So
it was their first produced by the Obamas.
Shout out to the Obamas for that.
I think they came on very late.
Yeah, no, they did. But they picked.
He was just like, Michelle, this sounds
good. They know how to pick them, I guess.
I guess so, yeah. We're going to take a short break, and we will be back. We're going to talk a little bit about Ghostwatch. I don't think I mentioned that at the beginning. We're going to talk about Ghostwatch, the 1992 British movie, as part of our found footage horror series after this break.
Hey, Cinematary listeners. Andrew here. During this break in the show, I'd like to mention that Cinematary does want your money. You can give us your money at patreon.com/cinematary, where you can chip in a small fee of about $5 a month, the price of a fancy coffee, in exchange for shout outs in every episode, the opportunity to choose movies we cover on the show, and bonus episodes every month in which we talk about more movies as well as other miscellaneous stuff. In the past, we've just been humbly asking for you to share the show and engage with us, and we would still love for you to do those things. You can tweet us at Cinematary, send us an email, zach@cinematary.com, leave us a review on iTunes, all that stuff. But Cinematary has grown a ton in the past few years due to the hard work of a bunch of writers, myself included, who haven't been paid for their labor, which is sadly a pretty normal thing. We record things and write things for free, you listen to and read them for free, and the only people getting paid are like Apple and Google, which is depressing. So, if you appreciate what we do, if you feel like there's some sort of value being exchanged here and you'd like more of it, help us normalize paying people by going to patreon.com/cinematary and chipping in $5 a month. We would truly appreciate it. Thanks for listening. Now let's get back to the show.
This Halloween night to the first ever TV Ghostwatch. That's the scene in Fox Hill Drive in Northolt. Our outside broadcast units are there. That's the house where it might all happen tonight, or it might not. We shall see. We're going to investigate one of the most baffling and fascinating areas of human experience, the supernatural. Tonight, television is going ghost hunting in an unprecedented scientific experiment where we hope to show you, for the first time, irrefutable proof that ghosts really do exist. I'm joined in the studio by
and we
Dr.
are
Lynn
back
Pascoe
with part 2 of
expert
episode
technical advice.
266 of Cinematary. In this part, we will be kicking off our found footage horror series with 1992's Ghostwatch, directed by Leslie Manning, from a script by Stephen Volk. The film stars Michael Parkinson, Sarah Green, Mike Smith, Craig Charles, Gillian Beavan, and Keith Ferrari. Broadcast on BBC One on Halloween Day in 1992. The movie was filmed ahead of time, but presented as a live investigation of paranormal happenings at a London home, as reported by BBC reporters. During and following its first and only UK television broadcast, the show attracted a considerable furor, resulting in an estimated 30,000 calls to the BBC switchboard in a single hour. The story, based on the tale of the Enfield poltergeist, was put into production months before and was complete fiction. The presentation contained realistic elements, which suggested to a casual viewer that it was an actual documentary. The scenes at the house and the street were all shot on location around 5 to 6 weeks before the recording of the studio scenes. The Enfield poltergeist was a claim of supernatural activity at 284 Green Street, a council house in Brimsdown, Enfield, England, between 1977 and 1979, involving two sisters aged 11 and 13. Some members of the Society for Psychiatrist Research, such as inventor Maurice Grosse and writer Guy Lyon Playfair, believed the haunting to be genuine, while others such as Anita Gregory and John Beloff were, quote, unconvinced and found evidence the girls had faked incidents for the benefit of journalists. This is my favorite committee. Members of the Committee for Skeptical Inquiry, including stage magicians such as Milbourne, Christopher, and Joe Nickel, criticized paranormal investigators for being credulous, whilst also identifying features of the case as being indicative of a hoax. A phone number was shown on the screen so that viewers could call in and discuss ghostly phenomena. The number was the standard BBC call-in number at the time, and callers who got through were connected first to a message telling them that the show was fictional before being given the chance to share their own ghost stories. However, the phone number was besieged by callers during the showing, and many people who telephoned simply got an engaged tone. This commonly happened when phoning BBC call-in shows, and it inadvertently added to the realism instead of reassuring viewers it was fiction. Ghostwatch was originally conceived by writer Stephen Volk as a 6-part drama similar to Edge of Darkness, in which a fictional paranormal investigator and a TV reporter investigate poltergeist activity at a North London housing estate, gradually discovering more elements of the mystery each week. This would have culminated in the final episode in a live TV broadcast from the property, in the vein of Nigel Neal's The Quartermass Experiment and Quartermass in the Pit, in both of which all hell breaks loose. However, when producer Ruth Bumgarden doubted the viability of an entire miniseries and recommended instead a 90-minute TV special, Volk suggested that they, quote, do the whole thing like episode 6, portraying it as an actual live broadcast fronted by well-known TV personalities. The BBC, however, became concerned about the effect the broadcast would have on the public and very nearly pulled the show shortly before broadcast. Ultimately, they insisted on adding opening credits, including the writer's name, in addition to a screen one title sequence. The reaction to the program led the BBC to place a decade-long ban on the program being repeated after its initial broadcast. Many methods familiar to modern ghost hunting shows, such as Most Haunted, are demonstrated in the show, some of which were either genuine state-of-the-art technology at the time or simulated to give the idea that they were real. The house was allegedly equipped with motion detectors, temperature sensors, and covert cameras. The temperature sensors were referred to as being able to check for dramatic changes in temperature that ghost hunters linked to real-life ghost sightings. One major feature of the show was a genuine thermographic camera, which, although it did not pick up any ghosts, came in very handy when all the lights failed at the end of the show. 18-year-old factory worker Martin Denham, who suffered from learning difficulties and had a mental age of 13, committed suicide 5 days after the program aired. The family home had suffered with a faulty central heating system, which had caused the pipes to knock. Denham linked this to the activity in the show, causing great worry. He left a suicide note reading, quote, "If there are ghosts, I will be with you always as a ghost." His mother and stepfather blamed the BBC. They claimed that Martin was, quote, hypnotized and obsessed by the program. The makers of the Blair Witch Project were reported to have seen the film before going on to make their own movie. However, when asked about this on a podcast, Diminishing Returns, the film's director stated that they weren't made aware of the film until after the movie had been released. On that note, let's talk a little bit about Ghostwatch. Kind of as a movie, I wasn't incredibly impressed with it. You know, it's pretty standard. It's kind of silly, really, at times. But honestly, kind of in the vein of Blair Witch or even like the modern like Ghost Adventures, Ghost Hunters show, it's kind of interesting almost as like this act on the audience, this joke on the audience, as like this actual broadcast taking place. I mean, just kind of as this almost stunt work. What did you all make of Ghostwatch?
I mean, I guess it's like War of the Worlds, right?
Yes.
It's kind of incredible that people fell for it, I guess. And as a piece of quote unquote found footage horror filmmaking, I don't like a cursed broadcast or something. I don't know. It's not compelling for like a really long time.
I mean, I don't know about you. I wasn't necessarily scared during it, but I was kind of marveling at like just the I guess the pacing, the way that they set up the program. It was kind of interesting.
I mean, I think it is a kind of a good, not just because, you know, it comes up before the Blair Witch Project, but I do think it is a very interesting case study a little bit in found footage and what we consider found footage. Because, I mean, first off, it stretches it has the shared quality of, you know, presenting itself as nonfiction and as reality, but it isn't, you know, the sort of the legend or the myth in the way that the Blair Witch Project or something is, where it's like, oh, this was recovered and assembled, you know, by somebody else after the fact, and this is what kind of the evidence that remains of these things that happened. This is like very different, and that you're just like sort of getting it all at once, and it's not this like artifact necessarily. It's more of this it's this experience, you know.
Yeah, and it's people who, if you were in England at the time you would recognize as media personalities.
Yeah,
it wasn't
reporters.
Yeah, it wasn't like these with the Blair Witch. It was people that nobody really knew of, and so when they said that they disappeared or died or whatever, people believed it. But when you have these recognizable faces, I think that angle was kind of interesting.
Yeah, because it does sort of like, I mean, it is really interesting to think about, like, in terms of found footage, like the question of who is giving it to you, like, you know, who is saying that this is real, who is saying that this is true, and whether or not people actually believe it, I think, is sort of dependent on that. And like you said, you know, the Blair Witch Project, the fact that it comes out of nowhere, I think is why people believe that. But with this, it's like, this is, you know, the BBC, like, this is literally kind of coming from the government. And it's, I don't know, it's just like crazy that this exists. I mean, there's another BBC film that I know of from the 70s called Skin Flicker, which is a sort of found footage thing where it's like 3 revolutionaries filming themselves kidnapping and torturing a government official, and then they like commit suicide at the end. And it's not real, but presents itself as reality in the kind of Blair Witch Project way. But honestly, I feel like I liked this a little bit more than you guys. I mean, I do agree that it is pretty like mundane. Well, I'll say it's pretty mundane, you know, for like a lot of it, which every found footage movie has to be. But once the shit hits the fan, it's like
the shit. Yeah, I don't want to say I didn't like it.
Yeah, it's definitely like a weird curiosity. But
I mean, once things start going wrong, like, it's really riveting and tense. But just while I was watching it, I was like, this really nailed all of those bullshit history I don't know which channel it is. Sci-fi history,
yeah,
just like haunted house,
like A&E,
like reality TV shows, like that exact same. Like the exact same like artifice that exists in those shows. Like, you can feel it's all like producers just like trying to make something spooky, but that's doing a cash grab, and this is a fictional version of doing a like. Once I started thinking about it as a pre-runner to these quote unquote reality TV shows, I was like, this is even weirder, like harder to deal with.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that to kind of go back to your point, Nathan, like as like a horror movie, I wasn't incredibly impressed with it because, like I said, I wasn't entirely scared. But like as this artifact of found footage, and especially, I mean, I think it's unfair to this one, but it has to be linked to the Blair Witch Project just because that's the most well-known, like, kind of instigator of the whole thing. But this, I feel like, is even more ahead of its time than the Blair Witch Project was. Again, going back to the points that like you made, this is made by the BBC, this is made by the government. Like, this is like this Halloween Day kind of prank that they pull, that people kind of believe that even though there is that hokiness, that looking at it now today, after we have so many of these kind of ghost shows that play up the dimensions that we're seeing in this, the fact that they did it like live on Halloween, or I guess quote unquote live on Halloween, and kind of built up all of these different facets, from the neighbors who had the various folk stories, to the people calling in who had folk tales about the house, to just the way that the actors who are portraying the family in there kind of react. It feels very beholden to something that we would see today in the same type of context. But again, this was made in 92. I mean, this is almost 30 years old. Gabby, I'm curious to get your thought on it. I mean, was it something that kind of...
How familiar are you with found footage?
And what was your takeaway from it?
Yeah. So I have seen found footage films before, like Paranormal Activity, and I've seen Blair Witch Project, although it's been a long time since I've seen it. And I didn't know that it was a found footage project or found footage film until I actually sat down and watched it, because I didn't want to know anything about it before going in. I just did. And when I watched it, thankfully, like, I'll be honest, I'm a scary movie weenie for sure. But I was like, all right, cool, I can watch it. This is going to be great. And when I did, it was a really... I had to kind of like remind myself that you're right. You know, it was released in 1992, so I was like, okay, this is actually kind of good for me because I know that there's some kind of level of separation between. But then seeing how even the reporters or the characters within the film would make fun of the hokiness of it, that kind of added to the scary factor later when it was like, oh no, shit's going down. Like it's actually, things are actually really happening.
They have that the paranormal expert in there with Michael Parkinson, and he's just like, no, this is just a little bit too, and she's like, well, let's not.
Yeah, like she's like, this is a whole human experience. This is like a part of being a human. And Emilio, I have his name written down. Silvestri. Yeah, him just kind of downplaying everything that the doctor was saying. It's just like, oh, you really don't know what you're talking about, throughout the narrative of the film. But then later on, when things start getting really intense, I think that just having the skeptics and like, Craig Charles, how he jumped out of the closet wearing the monkey mask, and made a point of making fun of it. And that added to the realism later, which I really liked. And I just learning about the context of it later on. I did some research afterwards and realizing that this was intense. This was like one of the first times that, especially on television, that things like this were broadcast. And even apparently in 1994, the British Medical Journal showed that 2 boys suffered from PTSD from watching this. And like it was intense. Like people were, were really feeling it. And even years after it was released. I guess they didn't show it anymore in the UK. It never showed in the US until it was on Shudder. Right. So I'm curious, and this is for everybody, but I think one of the other things, and we've kind of talked about it a little bit, but it plays with the kind of comfort level that we have with media personalities, especially on television. I think that, again, going back to having Michael Parkinson is somebody who people knew from kind of nightly news and that kind of stuff on the BBC. Sarah Green, I was reading about, was on actually a children's program that people were very she had to go on the children's program like a couple days after to reassure people that she was alive and well, and it was fine. I mean, I think that one of the things compared to like Blair Witch that this plays with is how we, the kind of comfort level that comes with the with television and how people interact with those kind of personalities. I mean, what were y'all thinking of when you were thinking of seeing these TV reporters and these TV personalities kind of becoming a part of this narrative that was on screen?
Well, one thing that it made me think about a little bit is like how many blockbusters like have actual journalists and actual news anchors like create fake news reports in the world of the movie. I mean, even as far as like the last Mission Impossible movie, when Wolf Blitzer shows up and like they make the whole like fake CNN broadcast to convince this terrorist that his attack actually happened. And so it is like, that's not found footage, but it is like the blurring of lines between actual journalism and entertainment. I mean, obviously in terms of just like genre and what's on TV, that line has been really blurred, but it's, so blurred in cinema too, to the point of news anchors, creating literal fictions. It's weird.
Well, it blows my mind just like how bad people are at parsing like what is truth and what is fiction in media. Like to this day, like can't, not saying I'm exempt either, like people can't tell the difference. And just the fact that this had such a severe effect on just like unsuspecting viewers. Because when it starts too, like there's no indication that this is a fiction film. Because I just started it up and I was like, oh, here we are. News broadcast is going. So, like, maybe that's a little bit irresponsible. I don't know.
I've seen, like, fake news as far as, or, like, reporters and stuff, primarily in comedic things, especially recently. It just makes me think of, like, Parks and Rec, the character Perd Hapley. You heard with Perd. He's actually a news anchor, and he plays, like, a news anchor in every single fictional thing that he's in. Yeah. And then even the film like Pop Star Never Stop Never Stopping, like it's a Andy Samberg film, and it's like a mockumentary on a almost Justin Bieber like character who, you see the rise of his, pop star career and then his fall, but then like he has so many different like musical artists and actors and actual people who are in it who are interviewing as themselves. So I've seen it done like comedically before, but not so much as like an actual broadcast. So it's really interesting to kind of see the contrast between like, oh gosh, like somebody, this for real deal news anchor is telling me this and something scary as opposed to something like, oh, I just know you're messing with me. This is Andy Samberg.
And it's kind of interesting also because I think that us at the age that we're at in terms of our relationship with especially television news, like I think that people who are probably 40 over probably have a different relationship with television news to what we have. I mean, there's that kind of line of who's an actual news who's an actual kind of news anchor and who's not. I mean, when you look at something like what John Oliver, Jon Stewart were doing when, they're kind of fake anchors. And so that was what was kind of interesting to me. It was kind of this relic of a time where, people who really, because of the invention of television and how that became such a part of the home, how people really related to the anchors and really trusted them. And I think that similar to what Orson Welles did with War of the World, where he kind of betrayed their trust in the radio, this was kind of betraying their trust in the television news anchor.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's like, stars of all kinds, their personas give us different things and, sort of mean different things and fulfill us in different ways. And, news anchors are their own kinds of stars too. And, their personas, at least like in the ideal kind of archetype of a news anchor, the persona is basically truth and reality. Like you see this person, you hear this voice, you hear Walter Cronkite or whoever, and you're like, okay, these are the facts. And so it is really interesting to watch this, film, TV movie, mockumentary, whatever you want to call it, in an era where like faith in, I think, anchors has really sort of been eroded, or at least what anchors mean has changed to like, you guys were saying with like John Oliver or Jon Stewart, where it's like, they're not exactly, I guess there's the Stephen Colbert, the word he coined, truthiness, which sort of applies, I think, to like what anchors have become, where it's like, anchors are more the facilitators of specific viewpoints or opinions. And, obviously every journalism is fucking fake. Like there's no journalistic objectivity. I'm sorry, but it's like all words have baggage and meaning, and it's like I think it's crazy to act like you can be truly objective as a journalist. But I lost track of my point. But all that's to say is like I guess I don't know where I'm going with this. You guys keep going.
Sorry, I was just thinking. Also, speaking of, I don't know. Anchor personas or whatever, and just how modern news kind of invites these, they're not journalists, they're talking heads or like experts in whatever particular field, and it's just here's two opposing viewpoints, and like we did our job. Like here's the lady that believes in ghosts, and here's the dude who's phoning, satellite phoning in from New York to be like, nah.
That's exactly what it is, the like simulation of debate and actual discourse. When really
like that was really eerie to me.
Yeah, when really both sides have been picked by the news station and like, vetted by the news station, and it's not an actual like debate.
And I was just like, and they did it. I mean, this is just like a character beat and, part of the script of the film. But I mean, rings real true to life. But just the way they were needling the lady expert, just like, I was like, I mean, I know this is, you're writing a character here, but also that's how people are treated. Experts are treated on the news anyway, just because it's better television or like get a rise out of your guests. And I was just like, I don't like this. It's fake here, but it's real on CNN now, today.
So shifting kind of back to the horror angle of it, I mean, I guess in terms of kind of horror filmmaking, it doesn't seem like comparing to like other found footage movies. I mean, we're going to talk about the Paranormal Activity movies later. We've talked about the Blair Witch Project before on the podcast, but as you said before, when the shit hits the fan and the poltergeist activities really start kind of ramping up while they're in the house. The one thing that I was thinking about that was really interesting was the setup of because you kind of have this bridge between kind of analog digital technology, but it's very early digital technology compared to what you would see like today, where you would have like like nanny cams or other kinds of like GoPros or other ways to like be able to have coverage of the house. Like this one, they have like the way that they cover the house from the bedroom to the hallway to just the various spots around the house and how they're constantly kind of flipping back and forth between the two cameras. I don't know, that kind of burgeoning early digital technology was kind of interesting to me. I mean, what did you make of how they used that to kind of instill the horror once the I guess the poltergeisting started to begin?
I think like the part of the fear that you can feel is like the deterioration of the actual tape. I mean, like just watching DVDs or watching things in digital formats and things like that, it definitely changes your response and reactions to when things go wrong. Mm-hmm. But with the VHS or something like that, when something it's like a very physical form of media, then it's just like, oh, well, then something has to be actively, messing with it. It can't be just like something wrong with the player or something like, generally it's like a very physical thing that's messing with it.
There has to be a tangible, reason for why it's doing that.
Exactly. And so when watching it and, you're watching this woman that you've acknowledged and known forever, and she's on a kid's show and she's like walking and playing with the kids and being adorable and all of this stuff. And all of a sudden it just like starts, janking up. And then all of a sudden, all of these lights are flickering and popping, and it does look very realistic. I think like the previous technology before really plays a hand into the scare factor for it, because it'd be different where it's like, oh, you can just get like a fake light bulb. But at the time that's something that, not saying that it didn't exist, of course not. I mean, of course things like have evolved, but there were technologies that were similar to it before. But it's definitely a different sensation when you're watching light bulbs just popping out of nowhere, in 1992 than you are right now. I can't even imagine what it would have been like at the time when you're seeing like all of these very physical phenomenon happening instead of just like hearing a whisper, in a lot of scary movies now, or like seeing a random face in a corner.
Or you just think of like today, if the way that people are so easy, like you look at like a TikTok and the way that you can kind of edit that and how you can have somebody somewhere and then make them disappear. Right. And that's explained just through the editing. But in this, you don't really have that explanation going back to, you just have this kind of tangible thing that's in place, and so you don't quickly compute what the answer to that is immediately. Right.
It's like, oh, who's messing with the tape now? Oh gosh, what's happening now? Definitely like a sense more of panic than oh, I mean, I know that they can pull this person out.
Yeah.
One thing that's struck me about this is how in a lot of ways the sort of plot follows a lot of conventional horror movie logic. You have the sort of like, you have the kind of fake out scares early on and the sort of like dismissal of the horror, and you have these people sort of warning of coming danger, and the warnings are ignored, and then everything goes crazy eventually. But what's really interesting, and like I feel like sort of piggybacking off what you were saying, Gabbi, is that like this sort of takes that structure to the next level, to the point where it's like the scares aren't coming just from like special effects on set or afterwards. It's coming from like literal manipulation of the videotape of the film itself. And so it just feels like this extra step forward in kind of horror for me, where it's like not just about I don't know, like the movie is concerned not just with what's on the screen, but kind of the screen itself. And there's like a general emphasis on a lot of technology beyond just the video. They bring out the like analog reel-to-reel tape player. And, you've got phones buzzing and the switchboard and all of that. So it's just like a very like interested in technology and really emphasizing the analog technology.
Yeah, right. I was going to say analog, like the objects themselves are actually haunted.
Yeah.
Which is why I was like, this is like a cursed broadcast, just, you know, aired once in real life and then never again. There's this weird feeling about, you know, filmed on video and like manipulation and distortion of the videotape footage. And like a lot of horror, I think, around this time was kind of interested in that.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that'll be something that I'll be curious to see as we go through this series, if the other films have this emphasis on horror through technology, because I feel like that's kind of the crux of the subject of found footage horror in itself, is that it's horror that kind of follows the conventional tropes of the genre, but you're also filtering it through this technology that, whether it's, you know, something more analog with this movie to just the more digital computer screen, laptop screen of Unfriended that we'll end the series on. I'll be curious to see how technology plays a role in the horror throughout the series.
Yeah. Just even within this film, like they make a point of pointing to the technology as far as like using the infrared and stuff. Mm-hmm. And one of the reporters, Sarah Green, when she's like, "Hey, this cameraman is amazing. This sound guy is incredible. He can hear crickets all the way down the street." Like they're making a point of pointing out the technology and kind of the newness of the technology in order to demonstrate like this is kind of top of the notch at the time.
Yeah.
And so like this is the most accurate reading that you're going to get. So when things really start hitting the fan, then it's like, oh, this is not just access to maybe possibly faulty technology or something like that. This is the best that we could have, you know. This is something that's real and something that is infiltrating the tools that we're using in order to investigate.
Yeah, and that kind of goes into like messing with people's trust and like, because they're like, oh, they have the top of the line technology and all this stuff's happening. And so I think that's, again, that horror is kind of playing with the trust of the audience and the perception that the audience is going, well, they have this top of the line technology. How is this happening? How is this, you know, are they not able to figure this out? I think that fear of of how technology can kind of let you down, and most people that, you know, the average person doesn't have the understanding of how a camera or anything works, so they're just like, well, what's going on? Like, well, how can we fix this? You know, it's like, it's just like this helplessness that comes with technology that completely leaves people immobilized.
Yeah.
I feel like the found footage is sort of the next, and this movie especially, since it's literally a TV broadcast, you know, it's the kind of like the Videodrome 2.0, because you know how in Videodrome, James Woods' body starts to literally change as he watches these video broadcasts. And with found footage, you know, you have this sort of similar kind of horror and fear of these new technologies and sort of the change from film to video and digital. And found footage is like the body of James Woods in Videodrome. It's like the body has become infected by the horror, the body of the film itself, you know, the like visual image, the horror has started to seep into that, because it's, like, you know, we've been saying, it's not just about that content. It's about the video, you know, the materiality of the video itself, the static and the noise and the snow, you know, that's all a part of it. And there's like one part of this movie when shit really starts to go crazy, and the ghost expert in the studio is saying, like, you turned this into this seance. Like, you basically made a seance in the studio. And I was like, and this is so fucking corny, but I was thinking, whoa, the medium like literally became the medium. You know, the media became the medium to these haunted spirits and started channeling it out into all of these people's homes. And that's the crazy thing about this movie at the end of the day, is like, what was scary about the Blair Witch Project is that it came from nowhere, and like it was kind of it was a total fluke. Like, nobody could have watched that movie. Like, it's very possible that that movie did not become successful. This was a thing that was piped into people's homes and that people were going to see no matter what, whether they really chose to or not. And so there's just like an extra level of horror there for me, that like you're forced to watch this a little bit.
Well, it's like an infection.
Yeah.
Well, I was thinking about what kind of genres you can subgenres within the horror genre you can lay found footage on top of, because the other big one besides Blair Witch is Paranormal Activity, which is also like haunting, possession type of story. And I was like, I'm interested to see like how far you can, and I've seen Unfriended, which also kind of a possession thing, but possession through technology. So I'm like, how far can you stretch this format, really?
It does seem to lend itself to like stories of ghosts and hauntings, because I guess there is that like haunted materiality of the videotape, like we've been saying, and the obvious ghostliness of the of the image. But that is a really interesting question to like, how could video be incorporated? Like, how could digital found footage be incorporated into like the structure of a slasher movie or a monster movie or something like that? Or is there a way to do that? Or is this just how we think about technology as a ghost or something? I don't know.
This was a wild, way out of left field connection, but I was thinking of, can't remember which Halloween movie it was, but they did a thing where they rigged up the Michael Myers house, like make a webcam TV show. And this not found footage, but like interspersed throughout was this idea of,
oh my god,
which one was
that? H2O?
Maybe it was like 2000, so kind of around like, this time. Resurrection.
Resurrection, yeah.
I think it's Resurrection. I was like, they tried to do this. Like I said, this was kind of in the air around that time. That's a little bit later, but
it's also that reminds me of Halloween 3, the like
media, the advertisement thing.
Yeah,
Halloween 3 is bad though, for the record.
Yeah, I don't really like that one.
Not a stan,
but I think it's boring. But yeah, it is like, you got the people are scared of video
broadcast specifically.
Yeah, things where you can't like control, where somebody is not in full control of what shows up on screen. I think is part of it.
Gabby, you were gonna say something?
Oh no, it's like, it's interesting because kind of the opposite side of that reminds me a lot of Cabin in the Woods, which is one of my favorites. It's not really super scary, but it's like just that.
It's the production of images.
Well, it's like exactly. It's these hot college kids are going out on an awesome trip in the middle of nowhere, and they're being watched by
manipulated.
Absolutely, like physically and mentally manipulated by these forces that are trying to appease this deity, but through crazy ass ways. And at the same time, there's one character named Marty that people assume is just like this like comic relief character because he's a funny little pothead, but at the same time he's like looking around and is like, there are cameras in this cabin, there weird stuff is happening, why is that? And so like that weird kind of like connection from having someone infiltrate your house through a broadcast through your TV, or literally having your house infiltrated through another media source, is just, it gives you the willies kind of when you know that like your whole experience is being manipulated by some kind of outside force, whether it be through a screen or whether it be in the actual physical realm of your own peace of mind home, Yeah.
In the, what do they call it? The glory hole.
Yeah. Oh my god.
They kept saying that, and I was just like, "Jeez, you guys, please stop."
That kind of ruined that.
That's not what that means.
She kept saying it with such a straight face. My god.
Like, do they not know?
I don't know. Like, maybe the meaning has changed in the past couple of years, but
there's no way.
Made me laugh my ass off when she said that. Yeah, that definitely pulled me away.
He's in the glory hole.
Oh my god.
Any final thoughts before we wrap?
This movie's hard to find. That's upsetting.
I'll see. Check back in a couple days and see if I have PTSD or if I just otherwise become obsessed and haunted by this movie.
Yes.
Like, that's a little too soon, I think, to make that call. Yeah.
Well, that will wrap up this episode of Cinematary. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/Cinematary, on Twitter at handle @Cinematary, and on Letterboxd at letterboxd.com/Cinematary, where you can see all the movies that we talked about in this episode. I mentioned before, but head over to patreon.com/Cinematary. We got our latest Film Theory and Chill coming out later this week. It should be a good one, but until then, thank you so much to our patrons. Thank you to Cam, Chad Newsom, Christopher Metcalf, Eric Dukowski, Graham Jones, Harry Eskin, Maggie, Marie Barty, Matthew Lingo, Miranda Barnwall, Ron Hayes, Tyler Chandler, Whitney Rio Ross. Thank you so much for your patronage. Next week, we will be continuing this series with 2005's Noro, The Curse. Or A Curse, something like that. Something with a curse.
Oh my gosh. Zach.
Yeah. What's
no,
it? What
Roy.
is
I don't think any of us know.
You know how to say it?
Actually,
How
Zach.
it's spelled. It's a
That's the great chance of this show is that
Well,
Zach,
I got a week to
looks.
figure it out.
Zach is the one who constantly mispronounces things, but I'm sure if any of the rest of us had to pronounce some of the things that Zach does, that
Ghostwatch?
we wouldn't. But also, I don't know.
I'm going to mispronounce, like, unfriended whenever we do that.
Oh my god.
Indeed.
Yeah. Sorry, I got confused. Well, thank you guys for listening. We'll see you next week.